All right. Good, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me again. I just wanted to give you some reminders that the performance-based assessment project has been moved to the Wednesday the 23rd so that we can at least discuss some of the issues I'm finding in the drafts. And also because I am somewhat late in returning your drafts to you. I want to remind you that homework is due tonight, which is 3/16, and it's due via email to me. You are also going to have homework from this lesson, so please be sure to bring that next Monday. And I also want to remind everyone to complete their research hours because we're still missing quite a few hours from the majority of the class. Oops, sorry about that. The idea here then is that you can have things that are not reliable and not valid. So not valid, it's not at the bullseye, and it's not reliable because there is no actual grouping going on really. And then you can have things that are both reliable and both valid. And so the idea here, and so far as classroom assessment goes, is that, ideally we'd like tests to be both reliable and valid. We want them to measure what they're supposed to measure. If I'm supposed to be measuring your mathematical ability to add numbers, then my test should be measuring your ability to add numbers together, and it should do that every single time. Okay. So that's pretty much the idea behind validity. Is it measuring what it's supposed to measure? Again, we're going to be talking about validity in depth on Monday, but reliability is the idea here. When we consistently do it, do we get the same result? Okay. So we care about this sort of consistency, so this repeated testing that we do. We care for it a lot across time and across grades, so that when we talk about predicting student achievement and whether people can go into the next grade or not, we need to know that these things are reliable, because if they're not reliable, then we can't really make good educational decisions based off of it. So, like we just said earlier, you can have a very reliable test and it measure absolutely nothing. As long as it consistently does it, then okay, then it's reliable. It's reliably doing the wrong thing, but altogether it is reliable. So we consider 4 types of reliability evidence to be very important, and they do have some different names that you'll see popping up every once in a while. So we have this idea of stability. So we look at stability in test-retest. So if I give you a test and then I retest you, do you get the same score? So obviously there's kind of a problem that comes into play there. If I give you a test and then I have you retake it, the effect of taking it the first time may kind of impact your retest. So we get into some super complicated statistical stuff and trying to knock out the effect of that retesting memory effects. So we're not going into that in this class, but please know that stability we care about test-retest. And so not just within an individual person, but test-retest for grade levels, for types of students. So in your big, high-stakes tests, they have, a lot of stability in them because we test them on third graders, then we retest them on third graders. We continue to test and test and test for all incoming third graders over many years. And so in that way we establish stability. All right, so another type of evidence is equivalence, which is called also measured via alternate forms. So the idea behind equivalence is that if I have the same test and alternate form, meaning A couple things. One, that I had one big set of test items, and I decided I'm going to have, 80% of the tests be the same in both, but a few different items in each. Or I reordered the test. So this kind of helps, just as a separate issue. It helps if you have students and you're worried about them taking like a Scantron test or some sort of multiple choice test, and you're worried that they might be cheating by looking at another student's paper. Well, if the students are having tests that have the items in different orders, then that kind of removes that issue. So that's what they mean mostly by equivalence and alternate forms of a test. Internal consistency, we generally measure via Cronbach. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. We're going to talk about each of these forms in a little more detail in just a second, but we talk about internal consistency with split half test taking, where half the test is taken by the students and half of the other test is taken by the students. So ideally, a good test, if you'll recall, will have several items measuring the same construct. So we talked about this a while ago, talking about triangulating on a sort of topic that we want to sort of come to the consensus around. Yes, the student has mastered this specific topic because I've asked a question about this aspect and this aspect, and they have demonstrated their understanding. Well, in split half, I take just one of those questions and give it to a student. I take a different question that I didn't ask on Form A and I put it on Form B, and so they are still measuring the same construct, but Form A got one part of the question and Form B got a different part of the question. You're still covering the same construct, but you're giving them different questions. Consistency of ratings, which is inter-rater reliability. We're going to talk about this a little bit, but this is going to come up a little bit less in your actual practice. So we will talk about it and talk about its application, but I'm going to wait till we actually get to the slide on it to show you what we're talking about. Okay, so stability, we talk about this. You give the same test at least twice. So stability, you could be giving the same test many times. But you generally have some sort of time interval between tests, whether it be minutes, whether it be years. So you see a lot of change scores coming out of test retest sort of testing situations. But as I said before, there are problems about memories and experiences between the tests, as well as the length of time. So if you think about it, if I give you like an entrance test and I give you an exit test, you have matured and you have also learned all the content of that semester. So the effect of that, how do I really separate that out from your original score based on then your exit score? How do I account then for the growth you made as an individual plus the growth you made as a student plus any other outside factors? So it's kind of a crazy conundrum that statisticians have to work with. So test retest is very useful for you guys. It might be useful. One immediate thing comes to mind is RTI testing. So test retest, I give a test, like a benchmark test to students, and I see how they do. I give instruction, and then potentially I give them more instruction based on what tier they're in. Tier 2 and Tier 3, of course, receiving more instruction than Tier 1. And then I retest. So I want to see how stable is their issue, right? If I'm not seeing any progress, even though they've received the extra intervention, then maybe they need even more intervention. Maybe they need a different type of intervention. But then it's at that point I'm looking at test retest, and I'm seeing how stable an issue is. That being said, the test itself, the stability of the test is an issue. In RTI, you're generally working off of tests that have been proven to be stable, but your in-class assessments that you make on the fly or at the end of a unit may not be stable, and so you'll need to see how they perform from year to year. Okay, so test-retest reliability assumes that nothing happens between testing sessions. So yeah, that's not really the real world. Like we said, there's maturation issues. So this is a good example. What if you take a midterm about World War II on Tuesday, and a thief steals the test Tuesday night before the tests are graded, and some students watched a movie on World War II. If they retook the test, then they would suddenly have an increase in knowledge about World War II. That being said, even if, after the test, they could have talked to their fellow students about the test. Like, that this happens. People talk about the test afterwards. So that's a major issue with test-retest. All right, we'll just move on now. Equivalence. So this is the alternate form. You have two forms of the test, same group of people. So this is going to eliminate that memory issue. So like you can't make people forget that they took a test. So in this case, if you have half of your class, so every other student gets one form, and then the other students get form B. So that in that case you have nearly identical testing conditions because everybody's sitting and taking the test in the same class period with whatever happens outside, whatever distractions happening as they would. But you have these two equivalent forms of the test going on. Okay. Internal consistency is the split half. So you give the test once and you score two equivalent halves of the test. So this is the odd-even method, which is kind of like the layman's term for it. So when I take a look at this and I see it, I take a whole test. So if I have a 100 question test, I take all the odds and I put it on one form of the test, and then I take all the evens and put it on one form of the test. That's the odd-even method. So in that sense, the student is taking the whole test. So the student takes the full 100 question test, right? You take out the odds, you take out the evens, and then you score them, and you see if they are internally consistent. This is a really strange thing to bring up in classroom assessment. I cannot tell you how infrequent that teachers would ever do this. It is an issue because internal consistency matters on your big ticket items to know that the high stakes tests are actually considering internal consistency, that the items hang together well, that they are measuring interiorly what they're supposed to measure, in groupings that they're supposed to measure. It's all very important to actual test construction, but as an actual classroom teacher, you are less likely to ever need to do this. And if you ever do need to do it, Google is a fabulous resource for this. I hate to even say this, but the Wikipedia page on internal consistency is actually quite good. That being said, Wikipedia is not endorsing Wikipedia, but that it is a decent source for this at this. Okay. So consistency of ratings is also an issue here. We also call this inter-rater reliability sometimes. So it's judgmental scoring. So if you think back to like performance assessments where you might have have a panel of judges scoring an individual student, this is how well these two people agree with each other on the points. So you generally have some sort of rubric going on, and you are looking at how well these two trained individuals score a student, right? So in your classroom practicum, you might experience this where you're asked to score a student presentation along with the teacher, and you see how you and the teacher disagree on different points. or at least that's when I saw it. Anyways, if you happen to be in a classroom where you get an aide, it is very useful to have more than one rater on a project. The whole responsibility does not fall upon you to have every aspect of the rating perfect, because not everyone interprets presentations the same way. That being said, if you have a very strong rubric where you have everything very clearly defined, then you should be agreeing on the points for each candidate. Okay, so there are 4 methods of estimating a test consistency, but they're not interchangeable. So test retest is not the same as equivalent form, is not the same as split half, is not the same as inter-rater reliability. So test retest, where you take the test, you retake the test, is not the same thing as inter-rater, where I'm having 2 people judge a performance or something like that. Is not the same thing as equivalent form. It's not the same thing as split half. They all have their unique purposes. That being said, some of them will be used more than others. Okay. So there are some distinct factors that affect reliability. One of the big ones is your group's variability. So when you repeatedly administer alternate forms of the same test, we have issues with heterogeneous groups and homogeneous groups. So I know we talked about this during the actual presentations and group teaching. We talked about homogeneity, I believe. So heterogeneous groups, we're talking about higher reliability, and homogeneous groups, we generally have lower reliability. So homogeneous means that everybody is pretty much the same. And heterogeneous means that we are all sort of mixed up and unique individuals. Okay, so if we are measuring reliability, we want to be looking at heterogeneous groups. We want diversity in the group. That's going to give us a higher reliability when we look at the scores, so we can trust that better. Homogeneous groups, where everyone is very, very similar to each other, they result in, this is long term, so to speak, lower reliability, because if everyone is the same, then I can't then say and generalize it to a different population. So if we are looking at a homogeneous group, so if we're looking at Alaskan Natives are not potentially like people from the Deep South, right? They're going to be, we can't generalize Alaskan Natives to the Deep South. It's just not going to work. That's going to result in lower reliability. Okay, so another factor that affects reliability is scoring. So among your raters, you have objectivity and agreement of the correct answer that is going to affect your reliability. So in a performance, perhaps there is no particular correct answer. How well someone orates a speech from Julius Caesar or something is not going to have an actual correct answer. So there'll be approximations of correct answers, but sometimes there really is a correct answer. So sometimes things can just be wrong. So if you were writing an essay about some war, and you talk about an event that hadn't occurred yet, then you're wrong, right? That's not possible. But for the most part, there's always going to be some wiggle room where there's going to be objectivity between you and some other instructor, as well as a need for agreement on a correct answer. Okay, so another factor is the actual length of the assessment. The more items you test, the higher your reliability. So the reason this works out this way is that the more data points you have, the more likely you are to have an increased reliability, is what's really going on here. So when you when you increase the length of your assessment, you're increasing the potential score variability. So you're increasing the chances that students are going to score in different patterns. That this will make more sense when we talk about item analysis. But when you have groups of students that score well, so you're the students who do really well on the test versus the students that don't do really well on the test, their patterns, that's going to become more apparent with longer length assessment. That being said, you also have this better sampling of students' knowledge, because the more items you have on the test, the more likely you are covering the same standards from multiple aspects. Okay. Text complexity is very much so something that affects reliability. If you make something that's too easy or too difficult, you're going to get low reliability. So when you get homogeneous scores at all, so things are too easy that everyone gets it right, well then it's not really a reliable test if everyone gets it right. And then if it's too difficult and everyone's guessing, well then it's not reliable either, right? Right. So there's a lot of error due to guessing that occurs, and you want what you want to do when you're writing tests is to have, a mix of items. You want items that are not as complex. So in Bloom, you're talking like remembering level. So you know the facts, but then you also want some of those application-based things. You want to get to reach some of these higher levels. You want to ask the more complex questions that are really, diving deep into the student knowledge, and that's challenging, but doable. So we get tests that are reliable. I can reliably measure your knowledge on anything. I'm sure we can make a test for it, but we have to make sure that the tests that we construct pay attention to the length, that they are a good mix of easy and hard items, and not hard like purposely difficult, but really a good judgment of whether someone actually understood the material well. Okay. Right. So I would like you to do this activity. I'm going to ask you to write these down. They're going to be, let me start over here. I'm going to have a series of questions on the next slide, and it has just 10 of the 100 civics questions an applicant is able to be asked. So when individuals are asked questions during the naturalization test, so these are, foreign-born individuals that are trying to get citizenship of the United States, they have to pass this naturalization test. It's an oral test that a officer asks the applicant. So they're asked up to 10 questions, and you have to answer at least 6 questions correctly to pass it. And so this is the civics section, and I want to know if you can do this. So I want you to keep track of your answers, and we're going to score them at the end. And I really hope that you do play along with this, because it's a very interesting sort of test that happens. All right. So 1. How many amendments does the Constitution have? Who makes federal laws? 3. We elect a U.S. Senator for how many years? 4. How many justices are on the Supreme Court? 5. What territory did the United States buy from France in 1803? 6. How old do citizens have to be to vote for president? 7. Who wrote the Declaration of Independence? 8. Who was president during World War I? 9. Name one of the 2 largest rivers in the United States. 10. Why does the flag have 13 stripes? So go ahead and pause here if you need some time to answer these. I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide where I talk about the answers. So like I said, go ahead and pause me now and write out all the answers that you can. Marking out here, this was the beginning. How many did you get correct, right? Did you get 6 out of 10? Because the 6 out of 10 here is the passing rate. So I would be very interested to know if you passed or not. And as the sort of check-in for this assignment, I want you to email me whether you passed with 6 out of 10 or not. So please just email me lmj09c@my.fsu.edu and let me know, did you pass or not? That's going to be your participation grade for today. We would give a quiz at this point, but I'd rather talk more about the sort of purpose of this test, of the civics test. The 100 items, we can very much so look at split half, we can look at equivalent forms, we can do all sorts of things. Equivalent forms might be the easiest thing to do because there are just so many items that we can take a look at here. The other forms of reliability evidence are very interesting at play here. Test retest is a little strange because you don't really get a chance to test retest in the real test at all. So maybe that doesn't work here, which is okay because not every form of reliability evidence will work everywhere. Inter-rater, that is going to be very important because these are oral responses, and objectivity of a translated test can be very much so an issue, and so you would want more than one person scoring whether you covered all the points you were supposed to cover or not. The internal consistency aspect of things, I think that you would be seeing more of that sort of behind the scenes, but as an actual test taker, I suppose you could be seeing some of it, just having a hard time envisioning how you would notice that if you're only asked 10 questions in an actual session. So I don't know about that one being so visible. All right. Now, I would love in that email you drafted to me to tell me whether you think this is a reliable test or not. I have my own sort of opinion on whether it's a reliable test. In previous classes, when we've done this sort of quiz, it hasn't really been very reliable. So my American citizen students have bombed this test, like badly bombed this test. And I've had a couple of students who had actually taken the naturalization test before, and this was a component, and they did well. They did very well. So I'm not sure really what this is, how this could be considered reliable if we have. I guess it more what I'm trying to get at is boiling down more to is what this test is supposed to really do. So that's more of an issue of validity, right? What is it supposed to do? If this is supposed to measure whether you know your American history and geography and the rules of our country, then yeah, okay, sure. Then our test is probably very reliable. That's all it really does. It does it every single time. That's all we're asking about. But is it valid? Is a civics test for citizenship into the United States based on these items, is it valid? The items themselves are valid, sure. So, I mean, the historical nature of the items, okay, yeah, that's valid. But construct-wise, that's going to be something of a debate, as is whether it's reliable or not. Because if I test on one population, i.e., naturally born citizens of the United States, which is the majority of you, I would imagine, and you didn't pass, then how is it reliably measuring citizens in the United States if the United States' own citizens can't pass it, right? So that's a bit of a conundrum that we have to deal with in sort of thinking about tests where there are multiple things to consider. So, and there isn't, always one particularly correct answer to go around here. So when we come back, we are going to be taking a quiz. So quiz, I'm pretty certain it's not quiz 9 anymore, but we will be having a quiz come next Monday on reliability. So I look forward to seeing everyone and talking about the drafts from the performance-based assessment. At that point, when we have the time to really dig into the issues of validity. That being said, I want to remind everyone again, you do have homework. It's going to be posted on the website. I say the website. No, it's going to be posted on Blackboard. And I will get your draft feedback to you as soon as possible if you haven't already seen your feedback from me. All right, that's about it. I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.